The cave smelled of copper and gunpowder. Maya Brennan pressed her back against the limestone wall, left hand clutching the blood-soaked pressure dressing on her shoulder. The Afghan sun was climbing outside, turning the valley into a furnace. But inside the cave, the air was cool and still and heavy with the smell of violence. 18 hours. She'd been fighting for 18 hours. The Barrett M82A1 rested on its bipod 3 feet in front of her, the massive 50 caliber rifle aimed at the narrow valley approach where they'd keep coming, where they'd been coming all night. The weapon's black metal was hot from repeated firing, the barrel still radiating heat despite the dawn chill. Maya's right hand moved to the small pile of brass-jacketed rounds beside the weapon. Her fingers steady despite everything steady, like her father had trained them to be, counted the ammunition that remained. 11 rounds of 50 caliber BMG ammunition between her and whatever came next. She'd started with 48 when she picked up this rifle from a dead Taliban fighter yesterday morning. 48 rounds and a promise she'd kept for 8 years, a promise she'd broken to keep a dying Marine alive. 37 expended casings lay scattered across the cave floor behind her, each one representing a choice, a calculation, a life ended at distances most people couldn't comprehend. But those were yesterday's problems, yesterday's mathematics. These 11 rounds were today's equation. Through the cave entrance, Maya could see them, bodies scattered across the valley floor at intervals that told a story 600 yards, 800, 1,000, 1,200. 14 Taliban fighters who'd come hunting one wounded American medic and found something they hadn't expected. Behind her barely conscious Lance Corporal Finn Holloway lay on the cave floor. The tourniquet on his left leg had been in place for 17 hours and 43 minutes. Too long, the leg was probably gone. But the alternative had been watching him bleed out in 90 seconds, so the choice had been easy. He was breathing. That's what mattered. Maya's vision swam slightly and she blinked hard to clear it. Dehydration, blood loss, infection creeping into her shoulder wound, fever that had started 3 hours ago and was getting worse. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from her body shutting down one system at a time, prioritizing survival over comfort. Not yet, she told herself. Not yet. She could hear them out there. Voices calling in Pashto, angry, frustrated, cautious. Somewhere in their tactical calculus, they were trying to understand how one American wounded, isolated, running low on ammunition had held this position through the night. They didn't know about her father. Didn't know about Master Sergeant John Brennan's scout sniper, who'd spent 6 years teaching his daughter that marksmanship was mathematics, in discipline, and the willingness to make impossible shots when lives depended on it. They didn't know that every weekend from age 10 to 16, Maya had been on a Colorado shooting range, learning wind reading and bullet drop, and how to control her breathing between heartbeats. They didn't know she'd sworn never to use those skills again after her father died in Fallujah in November 2004. They didn't know that yesterday she'd broken that promise. Maya's finger rested lightly on the Barrett's trigger guard, not touching the trigger itself that was unsafe, but close enough to engage in a fraction of a second. Through the scope's lens, she watched the ridgeline 800 yards distant, looking for movement, for the telltale signs that they were regrouping for another attempt. 11 bullets left. She'd make them count. Somewhere in the back of her mind, her father's voice from a lifetime ago last magazine is sacred, Maya. Every round deliberate, every shot justified. When you're down to your last rounds, that's when training matters most. I know, Dad, she whispered to the cave walls. I know. Behind her, Holloway groaned the first sound he'd made in an hour. Maya didn't turn around, couldn't afford to take her eyes off that valley. But she spoke anyway, her voice rough from dehydration and breathing dust. Still here, Marine, still protecting you. No response. He drifted back into unconsciousness. Maya's hand moved from the trigger guard to her radio, keyed it one more time, even though she knew what the answer would be. Cooper, this is Brennan. How copy should not be static? Just static. The SEAL team was still out there somewhere, still pinned down by the same ambush that had separated her and Holloway from the main element. Lieutenant Wade Cooper had told her 6 hours ago that quick reaction force was inbound, that help was coming, that she just needed to hold on. 6 hours ago might as well have been 6 years. Through the scope movement, 2 figures cresting the ridge silhouetted against the rising sun. Scouts probably, testing her response time, trying to determine if she was still combat effective or if blood loss and exhaustion had rendered her harmless. Maya settled the crosshairs on the lead figure. Range 780 yards. Wind maybe 10 miles per hour from the west gusting. Bullet drop at this distance, approximately 28 feet. She adjusted her hold, controlled her breathing, found the space between heartbeats where the world went quiet and still. Her father's voice again. Squeeze, don't pull. Surprise yourself with the shot. The Barrett roared. 780 yards away, the lead scout dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The second figure disappeared behind the ridge so fast he might have teleported. 11 rounds became 10. Maya worked the bolt chambering a fresh round and settled back into position. They'd be more cautious now, more patient. But they'd come again. They always came again. And when they did, she'd be waiting with 10 rounds and the skills her father had beaten into her muscle memory, the skills she'd tried to bury for 8 years, the skills that were the only thing standing between Holloway and a summary execution in this Afghan valley. The sun climbed higher, the heat built. And Maya Brennan, hospital corpsman, second-class daughter of a legend keeper of broken promises, counted her ammunition and prepared for whatever came next. But to understand how she'd gotten here, how a quiet Navy medic ended up alone in a cave with a sniper rifle and a dying Marine, you had to go back 72 hours. Back to when Maya Brennan was just a corpsman. Back to before the promise broke. Back to the beginning. 72 hours earlier. Forward Operating Base Dwyer Helmand Province. The medical tent at Phoebe Dwyer existed in a state of controlled chaos that only looked chaotic to outsiders. To Maya Brennan, it was a symphony. The steady beep of vital sign monitors. The quiet conversations between corpsmen, triaging incoming casualties. The rustle of supply bags being restocked. The distant thump of helicopters bringing men who'd been whole yesterday and weren't whole today. She stood at a stainless steel table, gloved hands working with the precision of a watchmaker, removing a long wooden splinter from a young Marine's palm. The kid couldn't be more than 19, still had acne on his cheeks, watched her fingers move with the kind of fascination people get when they're trying to focus on anything except the pain. How long you been doing this, Doc? He asked. Everyone called corpsman Doc, regardless of rank. It was a term of respect, of trust, of the unspoken understanding that when you were bleeding, this was the person who stood between you and death. 4 years, Maya said. Her voice was quiet, professional, the voice of someone who'd learned early that loud personalities didn't save lives. Competence saved lives. The splinter came free cleanly. She'd positioned the forceps at exactly the right angle, applied exactly the right pressure. No tearing, no secondary trauma. Her hands knew the work the way a pianist's hands knew scales. Steady hands. That's what Senior Chief Reeves had called them last month. Surgeon hands, he'd said. The kind of hands that didn't shake under pressure, didn't fumble with IV lines when the world was exploding around you, didn't fail when someone's life balanced on your ability to tie a tourniquet in 12 seconds instead of 15. Maya had deflected the compliment. That's what she always did. She dropped the splinter into a metal dish and reached for antiseptic. At 5'3" and 118 pounds, she didn't look like someone who'd spent 4 years attached to Marine recon units. The desert had weathered her some fine lines at the corners of her green eyes, a permanent squint from too much sun-skin, tanned to a golden brown, that her mother would have disapproved of. But her hands remained unmarked, unscarred, steady. You're good at this, the Marine said as she wrapped his palm in clean gauze. Maya didn't look up. It's my job. Always minimize. Always deflect. That's what you did when you had a past you couldn't afford to examine too closely, when you'd spent 8 years building a new identity on top of an old one, when your hands knew things your personnel file didn't mention. The tent flap opened and sunlight stabbed through the dim interior like a physical thing. Senior Chief Marcus Reeves ducked inside 6'2" and built like he'd been carved from granite, 48 years old, with the kind of weathered face that came from 3 decades in special operations. SEAL Team 3, combat medic. The kind of operator who'd seen enough action to know when to be scared and when to just get to work. Brennan's D, he said, his voice carrying the particular timbre of someone who expected to be obeyed. Chief needs you at the TOC briefing in 10. Maya finished tying off the bandage with a neat knot. This Marine First Chief. Reeves nodded, no argument, no impatience. In the medical tent, the corpsman's word was law rank be damned. He waited while Maya completed her work. Checked the bandage one more time, gave the kid instructions for keeping it clean, logged the treatment in her notebook with the meticulous handwriting of someone who knew that documentation saved lives when drug interactions became critical. She stripped off her gloves, washed her hands in the corner sink, and followed Reeves into the white-hot Afghanistan morning. The heat hit like a hammer. 112 degrees according to the thermometer outside the tent, and it wasn't even noon yet. July in Helmand Province meant temperatures that turned vehicle interiors into ovens and made body armor feel like you were wearing a furnace. They walked in silence through the organized chaos of the FOB, Marines moving with purpose between buildings. The diesel rumble of generators keeping the electronics alive. The distant thump of a Chinook helicopter somewhere beyond the wire. The particular smell that came from 400 men living in close quarters in a climate that wanted them dead sweat and dust, and JP ate fuel in the metallic tang of weapons oil. "You've been sleeping," Reeves asked without looking at her. "Enough." "That's not an answer, Brennan." Maya kept her eyes forward, watching her boots kick up small clouds of dust with each step. "It's the only answer I have, Chief." He let it drop. Reeves was good about knowing when to push and when to back off, when concern was appropriate, and when it crossed into micromanagement. It was one of the reasons Maya respected him. The Tactical Operations Center squatted in the middle of the base like a reinforced bunker, which is exactly what it was. Sandbags stacked 8 feet high. Blast walls. Enough electronic equipment inside to coordinate operations across 3 provinces. The air conditioning hit like walking into a freezer after the outside heat. 6 men waited around a map table covered in satellite imagery and tactical overlays. SEALs mostly. Maya recognized the particular way they held themselves, the quiet confidence that came from being the most dangerous people in any given room and not needing to prove it. She'd worked with SEAL teams before. They were professional, competent, and generally willing to listen when corpsmen told them that a man couldn't patrol on a torn ACL no matter how much he wanted to. Lieutenant Wade Cooper stood at the head of the table, 35, lean, with the kind of weathered face that came from too many deployments and not enough sleep. Good officer? Fair. The kind who made hard decisions and then lived with them instead of making excuses. "Brennan," Cooper said, nodding acknowledgement. "Thanks for coming. You know everyone here." Maya's eyes swept the room. Reeves, 2 SEALs she'd worked with on previous operations, Thompson and Rodriguez, and 3 she hadn't met, including a petty officer first class with linebacker shoulders and eyes that said he'd rather be anywhere else. His name tape read Sullivan. "Most of them, sir." "Right, let me bring you up to speed." Cooper tapped the map table, highlighting a location in red. "Intelligence reports a Taliban weapons cache here 15 kilometers northeast of our position. Small compound, probably 6 to 8 military-age males on site. Mission is recon and verify, get eyes on the cache. Confirm the intelligence, paint it for an airstrike if the ordnance justifies the sortie." Maya studied the map with tactical eyes she wasn't supposed to have. Rough terrain, mountains, limited exfil routes. The kind of geography where things went wrong fast and stayed wrong. Her mind automatically started calculating medical contingencies, water requirements for a 15-click patrol in this heat, casualty evacuation times, if someone went down in the mountains, the kinds of injuries you got in that terrain. Combat medicine was mathematics. Calculate the variables. Prepare for the worst. Hope for the best. "Your role," Cooper continued, and Maya pulled her attention back to his briefing, "is strictly medical support. You'll move with the patrol, provide aid if needed, but you stay back from any direct action. Rear element with Lieutenant Rodriguez." "Clear." "Clear, sir." Sullivan shifted his weight. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but Maya caught it in her peripheral vision. Filed it away. Body language told stories that words didn't. "Questions?" Cooper asked the room. Maya had about a dozen. Questions about the route, about the intelligence source, reliability, about what they'd do if the 8 military-age males turned out to be 20. But she'd learned early in her career that corpsmen who asked too many tactical questions got labeled as overstepping their lane. Better to stay quiet, absorb the information, and be ready when things inevitably went sideways. "No, sir," she said. "Good. We step off at 0300. Get your gear squared away. Dismissed." The room began to empty. Maya turned to follow Reeves out, but Sullivan's voice stopped her. Not directed at her, carefully directed at the SEAL beside him, but just loud enough to carry. "So we're babysitting now." Maya's shoulders tensed for half a second before training took over. "Let it go. Don't react. Prove yourself with actions, not words." That's what her father had always said. She kept walking, but she'd heard it, babysitting. Like she was cargo to be protected instead of a professional who'd spent 4 years keeping Marines alive in places where the war was very real and very close. Outside, Reeves fell into step beside her. "Don't let Sullivan get to you," he said quietly. "I'm not. He's a good operator, just cautious about unknowns in his team." Maya nodded. She understood. In their world, unknowns got people killed. Trust had to be earned with blood and competence, and she hadn't had the chance to prove either to Sullivan yet. "Get some rest," Reeves said. "Tomorrow's going to be long." "Yes, Chief." But Maya didn't sleep much that night. She lay in her rack in the female quarters, a plywood box barely big enough for a cot and a wall locker, staring staring at the ceiling and thinking about the mission, about Sullivan's skepticism, about the weight of expectations she'd spent 8 years trying to avoid. Her father's voice from somewhere in memory. The best operators are the ones nobody expects, Maya. The quiet ones. The ones who do the work without needing recognition. She hadn't expected to become an operator. Hadn't wanted it. After her father died in Fallujah in November 2004, after she'd promised her mother that she'd never follow that path, Maya had buried those skills as deep as they'd go. Joined the Navy as a corpsman, saved lives instead of taking them. For 8 years it had worked. For 8 years she'd been just a medic. But skills like her father had taught her didn't stay buried. They lived in muscle memory in the way she read terrain without thinking about it, in hands that knew how to hold a rifle, even when they were holding surgical instruments. Tomorrow she'd prove she could do the job. Just the medical job, nothing else. Tomorrow the promise would hold. The Black Hawk cut through the darkness at 120 knots, rotors beating the air in that distinctive rhythm that meant insertion was coming. Maya sat in the troop compartment, surrounded by 8 SEALs who looked like they were half asleep. That's what experience bought you, the ability to rest even when you were flying into hostile territory at low altitude. She kept her eyes open, watching. The crew chief at the door guns silhouetted against the star-filled Afghan sky. The pilots visible through the open cockpit door, hands steady on controls. The second Black Hawk 50 meters off their starboard side, another 8-man element matching their flight path. The helicopter smelled JP-8 fuel hydraulic fluid, the particular funk of military aviation mixed with the taste of altitude. They were flying nap of the earth, hugging terrain to stay below any potential radar coverage. Maya's stomach rolled slightly with each sudden altitude change, but she'd done enough of these insertions to function through the discomfort. Reeves leaned close, shouted over the rotor noise. "You good?" Maya gave him a thumbs up. Good as she was going to be anyway. 15 minutes out, the crew chief held up both hands. 15 minutes, the SEALs came alive. Not suddenly, not with any wasted motion, but gradually. Weapons checks with practiced hands that didn't need light to verify safeties and magazine seating. Night vision devices pulled down and powered on. The quiet professionalism of men who'd done this so many times, it was routine right up until the moment bullets started flying and routine became survival. Maya ran through her own pre-combat checklist. M11 pistol, 9mm, 6-hour standard issue for corpsmen seated in her thigh holster, with 1 round chambered and safety engaged. 4 spare magazines, 15 rounds each. 60 rounds total that she hoped she wouldn't need to use. Medical ruck secured to her back straps tight enough that it wouldn't shift when she moved. 42 pounds of life-saving equipment. Combat application tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, Israeli bandages, IV supplies, airways, the whole arsenal of combat medicine. Night vision device borrowed from the team, powered on and functional. Cooper's voice crackled through the internal comm system. 2 minutes. The helicopter began its descent. Maya's stomach dropped with it, gravity asserting itself as the Black Hawk flared for landing. She could see the landing zone through the open door now, a flat stretch of desert, moon-washed and empty, the kind of terrain that offered no cover and made you feel exposed even when nothing was shooting at you yet. Go, go, go! The team flowed out in a choreographed ballet of tactical movement. Maya went with them, boots hitting dirt head low beneath the rotor wash. Both helicopters were already climbing before the last man cleared the ramp, disappearing into the darkness like they'd never existed. And then silence. The kind of absolute silence you only got in the Afghan desert at night. So complete, you could hear your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the small sounds of equipment shifting as men settled into defensive positions. Cooper's hand came up. Rally signal. The 16-man element formed a loose perimeter, each man covering a sector, weapons ready. Maya found herself in the center, the safest position in the formation. Protected, like cargo. She pushed down the flash of irritation. This was her role. Accept it. Do the job. Cooper checked his GPS, oriented himself, pointed northeast. The patrol began to move. They moved through the darkness for 3 hours. The terrain rose gradually, flat desert giving way to rocky foothills that became steeper with each kilometer. Maya kept pace in the middle of the column, matching the rhythm of the men ahead of hers. Step where they stepped. Pause when they paused. Become part of the organism. But her eyes were working. She couldn't help it. Training from another life, instincts that 8 years hadn't erased. She read the terrain tactically, automatically noting cover positions, fields of fire, places where an ambush would be devastatingly effective. That ridgeline to the east, perfect overwatch position, whoever controlled it controlled the valley. The wadi to their right, natural avenue of approach for a flanking element, probably dry this time of year. But the erosion pattern said flash floods in spring. The boulder field ahead, 1,000 places to hide a nightmare, to clear the kind of terrain that turns simple patrols into close-quarters nightmares. She filed it all away, hating that her brain still worked this way, hating that her father's training ran so deep that even 8 years of deliberate neglect couldn't erase it. "You can't unlearn what I taught you, Maya," her father had said once. "You can choose not to use it, but you can't unknow it." For 8 years, that choice had been easy. Tonight, surrounded by men moving toward potential violence, the choice felt heavier. Cooper called a halt at 0500, 30 minutes before sunrise, the sky still dark, but with that particular quality that said dawn was coming. The patrol took up positions in a natural depression, using the terrain to mask their presence from anyone on the high ground. Maya lowered her medical ruck and unslung her water. Her thighs burned from the climb. She'd been spending too much time in the medical tent, not enough time on physical conditioning. The ruck felt heavier than 42 pounds, and she knew that meant she was dehydrated despite drinking regularly. Reeves appeared beside her, silent as a ghost. Seals move like that. You didn't hear them coming until they were right there. "Drink," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya drank. The water tasted like plastic and iodine tablets, but it was wet. "How you holding up?" Reeves asked. "Fine, Chief. Your breathing's elevated." Of course he'd noticed. Good medics noticed everything, and Reeves was one of the best. "Just the altitude," Maya said. "I'm good." Reeves studied her for a moment, then nodded. He didn't push, but she could see the evaluation in his eyes. Was she going to be a liability? Would she slow them down? Could she hack the pace they were setting? Fair questions. Questions every corpsman faced when they joined a special operations element. Questions that got answered with performance, not promises. The patrol moved out again as the sky began to lighten darkness, giving way to that strange pre-dawn gray that made everything look flat and lifeless. The kind of light that was too dark for regular vision, but too light for night vision devices to work effectively. The vulnerable time. They were 2 kilometers from the target compound when Sullivan on point raised a fist. "Halt." The entire patrol froze instantly, each man dropping into whatever cover was available. Maya found herself behind a boulder that wouldn't stop a determined breeze, but it was better than nothing. Her hand went to her pistol, automatically muscle memory from a life she'd tried to leave behind. She caught herself, forced her hand away. That wasn't her role. She was the medic, medical support only. But every nerve in her body was screaming, something's wrong. The ambush. Sullivan had stopped at the entrance to a narrow valley, the only practical route to the target compound according to their maps and satellite imagery. Steep walls on both sides rising maybe 200 feet. Rocky floor littered with boulders, 200 meters long from entrance to exit. A perfect kill zone. Maya could see it, instantly could read the terrain the way some people read books. Any competent fighter would see it. This valley was a death trap waiting to be sprung, and they were about to walk into it. Cooper moved up to Sullivan's position, both men keeping low. Their conversation happened over radio, too quiet for Maya to hear, but she could read their body language. Sullivan didn't like this approach. His shoulders were tense, his weapon up and ready. Cooper didn't like it either. He kept looking at the ridgelines, calculating fields of fire. But the mission required reaching that compound, and this was the only route that didn't add 6 hours to their patrol. 6 hours they didn't have if the intelligence was time-sensitive. Risk versus reward, the eternal calculus of combat operations. Cooper made the call. They'd proceed but tactical, every man alert, ready to break contact at the first sign of trouble. The patrol entered the valley in staggered formation, 5 meters between each man, weapons covering different sectors. Maya was positioned in the middle of the column, safest place, most protected. She felt her heart rate spike despite her training. Every instinct was screaming to stop, to turn back, to find another way. But she wasn't in charge. She was the medic. Her job was to follow and be ready. They made it 50 meters into the valley. That's when the world exploded. The first RPG came from the eastern ridgeline. Maya saw the flash of launch before she heard the sound, that distinctive whoosh crack of a rocket-propelled grenade. It impacted the valley floor 15 meters ahead of Sullivan, and the explosion was enormous in the confined space. Pressure waves slammed into Maya's chest like being hit with a baseball bat, sound loud enough to hurt. Then the machine guns opened up. Heavy weapons, multiple positions, pre-sighted fields of fire that had been planned and rehearsed. The Taliban had turned this valley into a kill zone, and the SEAL Patrol had walked right into it exactly like they'd been expected to. "Contact right," Cooper's voice controlled, despite the chaos, the voice of a leader who'd been here before. "Contact left, suppress, and move." The SEALs reacted with the precision of professionals, returning fire, moving to whatever cover existed. creating angles that made it harder for the ambushers to engage effectively. But there wasn't much cover to be had in the middle of a valley floor. The boulders were scattered, the distances between them too far, and the enemy had the high ground. Maya hit the dirt behind a rock that might stop small arms fire if she was lucky. Rounds cracked overhead with that distinctive supersonic snap that meant they were passing within feet. Inches. Close enough that she could feel the pressure wave of their passage. "Doc," someone was screaming. "Doc," she looked left. 50 feet away, Lance Corporal Finn Holloway, 22 years old, Marine security element, had showed her pictures of his girlfriend back in California just yesterday, was down. Blood spreading across his left thigh in arterial spurts, that distinctive bright red that meant femoral artery compromise. Femoral hemorrhage. 30 seconds until unconsciousness from blood loss. 2 minutes maximum until death. Maya didn't think. Couldn't afford to think. She moved. The distance from her position to Holloway felt like a mile. Bullets carved the air around her, kicking up rock dust, whining off stone with that distinctive ricochet sound. Her medical ruck felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but she couldn't drop it. She needed what was inside. Time did that strange thing it did under extreme stress, seemed to slow down and speed up simultaneously. She could see individual muzzle flashes on the ridgelines, could count the brass casings arcing from Sullivan's M4 as he provided covering fire, could hear her own breathing harsh and rapid inside her head. She reached Holloway in what felt like an hour but was probably 5 seconds. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated with shock. The blood was pumping from his inner thigh in rhythmic spurts that matched his heartbeat. Definitely arterial, definitely fatal, if not controlled immediately. She had maybe 45 seconds before he lost enough blood pressure to lose consciousness. Maya's hands went to work with the automatic precision of 4 years of combat medicine and hundreds of hours of training. Her mind cataloged the injury with clinical detachment, even as her body moved on pure muscle memory. Entry wound, medial thigh, no exit wound visible, likely projectile still lodged in tissue. Femoral artery compromised, possibly vein as well. Class 4 hemorrhagic shock imminent. Need tourniquet, need it now, need it high and tight. She grabbed a combat application tourniquet from her ruck-orange nylon band with a windlass rod designed to cut off blood flow completely through mechanical pressure. The device had saved countless lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. Would save Holloway's life if she applied it correctly and quickly. "This is going to hurt," Maya told him, her voice cutting through his shock. He was trying to say something mouth-moving, but no sound was coming out. Going into shock already, body prioritizing blood flow to vital organs, shutting down peripheral systems. Maya positioned the tourniquet as high on his thigh as physically possible, within 2 inches of his hip joint, and started cranking the windlass. The device was designed to apply crushing pressure enough to completely occlude arterial blood flow, which meant it had to be tight enough to cause tissue damage. Holloway screamed. Good. Screaming meant consciousness. Screaming meant his brain had enough oxygen to register pain. Silence would have meant death was imminent. She cranked the windlass 3 full turns, watching the arterial spurts slow and then stop completely. Locked it in place with the securing clip. Noted the time on the Velcro strap, 0637, because tourniquet time mattered. Too long and you lost the limb. Not long enough and you lost the patient. 90 seconds from impact to tourniquet application. Good time. Not great, but good enough. Holloway's eyes were starting to glaze, consciousness slipping. Maya pulled an IV kit from her ruck, needed to get fluids in him, immediately combat the shock buy time for his cardiovascular system to compensate for the blood loss. Around them, the firefight continued. Bullets cracking overhead. Explosions. The controlled chaos of men fighting for their lives. Maya found a vein on the first try, 18-gauge needle into the antecubital vein, taped secure. Connected a bag of saline, opened the flow all the way. A liter of fluid wouldn't replace the blood he'd lost, but it would help maintain blood pressure, keep his organs perfused, give him a chance. "Brennan," Cooper's voice sharp with stress. "We need to move now." Maya looked up. The rest of the patrol was falling back to a better position, a cluster of larger boulders 30 meters south, better cover, better fields of fire. Reeves was waving at her, gesturing urgently. But Holloway couldn't walk, could barely move, and Maya couldn't carry him alone. He outweighed her by 80 pounds, and she was already exhausted from the patrol. "I need help," she shouted. Sullivan appeared beside her, like magic seemed to materialize out of the chaos. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate, just grabbed Holloway's drag handle and started pulling. Maya kept one hand on the IV bag, holding it high so gravity could do its work, the other hand on her pistol. They covered 30 meters in 8 seconds, bullets following them the entire way. She felt one tug at her sleeve so close she could feel the heat of its passage, so close that another inch would have been bone and blood. They reached the boulder cluster and dropped behind cover. Maya immediately went back to Holloway, checking the tourniquet still tight, still effective, checking his pulse thready but present, maybe 90 beats per minute, checking his breathing, rapid and shallow classic shock presentation, checking his skin pale and clammy, another shock indicator. She needed a second IV line. 2 routes were better than 1 when you were fighting hemorrhagic shock. Around her, the SEALs were returning fire with controlled precision. 3-round bursts, aimed shots making every round count. Professional, disciplined. But they were outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in a valley with only 2 ways out: forward, through the ambush, or back the way they'd come. Neither was good. Cooper was on the radio calling for quick reaction force support, requesting immediate air support, trying to coordinate extraction. But Maya knew the mathematics of combat logistics. QRF would take minimum 30 minutes to spin up and fly out here. Probably closer to an hour given current operations tempo. They had to survive that long first. She got the second IV line established in Holloway's other arm, pushed fluids as fast as they'd flow. His color was marginally better, still pale, but not the gray-white of impending death. The tourniquets were working. The fluids were helping. He might make it. If they could hold this position. If QRF arrived in time. If the Taliban didn't overrun them. Too many ifs. Separated, the next 20 minutes were a blur of violence and controlled chaos. The SEALs fought like professionals, but the Taliban had numbers and position. Every time the patrol tried to maneuver, machine gun fire drove them back. Every time they tried to establish better cover, RPGs forced them to displace. Maya worked on Holloway with singular focus, blocking out everything except the medical task in front of her. Applied pressure dressings to smaller wounds. She hadn't noticed initially: shrapnel cuts on his arms and face, probably from the initial explosion. Monitored his vitals continuously. Adjusted IV flow rates based on his blood pressure response. She'd never had to shoot anyone. 8 years as a corpsman, dozens of combat missions, and she'd never needed to fire her weapon in anger. Her pistol remained holstered, her focus entirely on keeping Holloway alive. Then an RPG impacted the boulder directly above her position. Maya saw it coming, that distinctive trail of smoke and fire, but couldn't move fast enough. The explosion was massive, close enough that the pressure wave felt like being hit by a car. She threw herself over Holloway's body, instinctively shielding him with her own mass. Felt shrapnel tear into her left shoulder, hot pain immediate and sharp, like being stabbed with a red-hot poker. The world went white for a moment, pain receptors overloading, then training took over and she pushed through it. Rolled off Holloway. Checked him first, he was okay. The boulder had taken most of the blast, her body had taken the rest. Then reached back awkwardly to assess her own wound. Shrapnel in the left shoulder. She could feel the jagged metal embedded in muscle tissue. Maybe 2 inches deep. Painful, yes. Immediately life-threatening, no. She'd deal with it later. If there was a later. "We can't stay here," Reeves was shouting, his voice cutting through the ringing in Maya's ears. "They're going to flank us." Cooper made a decision. The kind of decision that defined leadership, the choice between bad and worse. Fall back. Rally Point Echo, 300 meters south. The patrol began a fighting withdrawal, moving in pairs, one element providing covering fire while the other displaced to the next position. Textbook tactics professionally executed. But Maya had a problem. Holloway couldn't move on his own, and she couldn't carry him alone. She looked for Sullivan, he'd helped before, but he was 70 meters away, suppressing a machine gun position. "I need help," she called again. Nobody heard her over the gunfire. Another RPG streaked in, impacted 20 meters to her right. The explosion was enormous, and Maya felt the shockwave pick her up and throw her. She hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming with concussion. When she looked up, the patrol was gone, not abandoned, displaced. They'd moved to the next covered position exactly like they were supposed to. Professional. Correct. But in the case and smoke and noise and violence, she and Holloway had been left behind. Separated. Maya's training kicked in with automatic precision. Assess the situation, identify threats, determine course of action. The Taliban were advancing from the north, moving with tactical discipline through the boulder field. The SEAL patrol had withdrawn south, trying to break contact and establish a better defensive position. Between them, trapped in the middle with no good options, were one wounded Marine who couldn't walk and one corpsman with shrapnel in her shoulder. She could hear Cooper on the radio, his voice tight with the realization of what had happened. "Brennan, what's your position?" Maya keyed her radio with bloody hands. "Still at the boulder cluster. Holloway can't move. I can't carry him alone." A pause. Maya could imagine the calculation Cooper was doing, the impossible mathematics of combat leadership. "We're pinned down," Cooper said finally, and she could hear the weight in his voice, the guilt. "Heavy contact, multiple casualties. We can't reach you. Can you move to us?" Maya looked at Holloway, looked at the distance to the SEAL position, 300 meters of open ground, looked at the Taliban fighters advancing from multiple directions. "Negative," she said. "Not without leaving the casualty." Another pause. Longer this time. When Cooper spoke again, his voice was rough. "Understand. Hold your position. We'll get to you as soon as we break contact." But Maya could hear the unspoken truth in his tone. They might not be able to break contact, might not be able to get back to her. The Taliban had them pinned, and reinforcements were probably coming. She and Holloway were on their own. Maya dragged Holloway behind the largest boulder she could reach, her shoulder screaming with every movement, set him down as gently as she could manage, checked his vitals again, pulse steady at 80 blood pressure, holding at 90/60 consciousness, returning in fits and starts. The tourniquet had been in place for 27 minutes. She had maybe 3 hours before permanent tissue death became inevitable. 3 hours to get him to surgical intervention or accept that he'd lose the leg. But losing the leg was better than losing his life. She took stock of their situation with the clinical detachment that combat required. Resources: 1 M11 pistol with 60 rounds total, 1 fragmentation grenade, 1 shoulder wound that needed treatment but wasn't immediately critical. Medical supplies sufficient for sustained care. No long-range weapons, no air support. No quick reaction force for at least 45 more minutes. Threats: approximately 20 to 30 Taliban fighters who knew exactly where she was and were probably coordinating an assault right now. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 60 pistol rounds against 30 fighters. Even if she was perfect, which nobody was, she'd run out of ammunition long before she ran out of targets. This was how you died in Afghanistan. Outnumbered, outgunned, waiting for help that might not arrive in time. Maya checked the tourniquet one more time. Still tight, still effective. Holloway would survive his wounds if she could protect him long enough for extraction. That was the mission now. Keep him alive. Hold this position. Wait for rescue. She pulled a field dressing from her medical ruck and awkwardly wrapped her own shoulder one-handed. It wasn't pretty, but it would slow the bleeding. That's all she needed to slow everything down. Buy time, survive. Her radio crackled. Cooper's voice distant and scratchy with interference. "Brennan, QRF is wheels up. 40 mics out. Can you hold 40 minutes, 2,400 seconds, an eternity in combat?" "I'll hold, sir," Maya said. Because what else could she say? That she was terrified. That 60 rounds wouldn't be enough. That she could already hear the Taliban moving closer, coordinating their assault, preparing to overrun her position. None of that would change anything. She settled into position behind the boulder, pistol in hand, and prepared to sell their lives as expensively as possible. Then she saw it. 20 meters away, half buried in dust where he'd fallen during the initial ambush, one of the Taliban fighters lay sprawled, and across his back, secured to a patrol harness with quick-release buckles, was a rifle. Not just any rifle. A Barrett M82A1, 50 caliber semi-automatic, 30 pounds of American engineering designed for precision fire at extreme range. The same rifle her father had carried in Iraq. The same rifle she'd learned to shoot when she was 12 years old. The same type of weapon she'd sworn 8 years ago she would never touch again. Maya's hands started to shake. Not from fear, from recognition, from muscle memory that didn't care about promises or time or the weight of her mother's grief. She looked at Holloway unconscious and depending on her to keep him alive. Looked at the Barrett just out of reach but close enough to matter. Looked at her hands, steady hands, surgeon hands, hands her mother had taught to heal, hands her father had taught to kill. For 8 years, she'd kept the promise. For 8 years, she'd been just a medic, just a corpsman, just someone who saved lives instead of taking them. But 8 years and 1,000 promises wouldn't stop the Taliban from executing Holloway if they overran this position. Maya made her choice. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. Then she moved. She covered the 20 meters in a low sprint that made her shoulder scream. Bullets followed her. She could hear them impacting rock, kicking up dust, but she didn't stop. Reached the dead fighter, grabbed the Barrett, pulled it free from the harness with hands that knew exactly how to handle it even after 8 years. The weapon felt right, felt familiar, felt like coming home to a place she'd tried to forget existed. Maya dragged the Barrett back to Holloway's position, every movement agony, but she didn't stop until she was behind cover again. Set the rifle down. Check the chamber-loaded round ready. Check the magazine, 48 rounds of 50 caliber BMG ammunition. 48 rounds. She settled the Barrett on its bipod, made sure it was stable, then looked through the scope. The valley stretched out before her in crystal clarity. The scope's magnification made distant targets close, turned 800 yards into intimate range. She could see them now. Taliban fighters moving through the rocks, advancing with the confidence of men who thought they were hunting one wounded medic with a pistol. They had no idea what was about to happen. Maya's hands found their positions on the weapon automatically. Left hand supporting the stock, right hand on the grip, finger outside the trigger guard until she was ready to fire. Every movement was muscle memory from a life she'd tried to leave behind. Her father's voice from somewhere deep in memory breathed Maya. Find your rhythm, slow your heart rate, squeeze between beats. She'd broken her promise to her mother. But Holloway was going to live. And Maya Brennan, Hospital Corpsman's second-class daughter of Master Sergeant John Brennan, keeper of broken promises, was done pretending she wasn't her father's daughter. The first shot would tell them everything had changed. The second shot would make them understand they'd made a terrible mistake. She settled the crosshairs on a fighter advancing at 700 yards, controlled her breathing, found the space between heartbeats, and squeezed. The Barrettman 82. A one's roar was like the voice of God. The recoil slammed into Maya's wounded shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer, and she gasped in pain. Through watering eyes, she watched the scope picture, forcing herself to verify despite the agony radiating down her left arm. 700 yards downrange, the Taliban fighter dropped like a puppet with cut strings. But it had been a bad shot. She'd pulled it left by maybe 2 feet, caught him in the shoulder instead of center mass. Sloppy. Her father would have been disappointed. Maya worked the bolt with practiced efficiency, chambering a new round. The brass casing ejected with a metallic clink, falling to join the growing pile of empties that would tell the story of this fight. 47 rounds remaining. The other Taliban fighters scattered, suddenly aware they were under fire from something more substantial than a pistol. They couldn't see her. The cave entrance and rock formations provided good concealment, but they knew someone was shooting, and they knew it wasn't small arms fire. Maya's shoulder was a mass of pain now. The shrapnel wound had reopened with that first shot, and she could feel blood soaking through the hasty dressing. Every breath hurt. Every movement was agony. But pain was just information. You could function through information. She found another target through the scope, 680 yards. A fighter taking cover behind a boulder, but his head and shoulders were visible. Smaller target than she'd prefer, but she couldn't afford to be picky. Her father's voice: first shot tells you what you did wrong. Second shot proves you learned from it. Maya adjusted for the wind. She could see it moving the dust devils in the valley, maybe 15 miles per hour from the west. Adjusted for bullet drop at this range. Compensated for the pain-induced tremor in her hands. Found her breathing rhythm. Slow. Controlled. The way her father had taught her when she was 12 years old and barely big enough to hold a rifle this size. Squeezed. The Barrett roared again. The recoil drove into her damaged shoulder like a knife, and Maya bit down hard to keep from screaming. Through the scope, she watched the target drop. Clean hit this time. Center mass. The other fighters were scrambling now, trying to find cover, trying to understand where the fire was coming from. Their confident advance had turned into a tactical retreat. Good. Maya settled back into position, fighting against the pain and exhaustion, and waited. Let them think. Let them regroup. Let them make their next mistake. Behind her, Holloway groaned. Still alive. Still unconscious. The tourniquet had been in place for 43 minutes now. He had maybe 2.5 hours before the leg was definitely gone. She needed to keep him alive that long. 700 hours. 1 hour into the siege. The next 4 hours were an education in patience and precision. The Taliban had learned from their initial casualties. They didn't advance across open ground anymore. Instead, they probed, sending 1 or 2 men at a time, using every bit of cover, moving with professional discipline that said these weren't local fighters but foreign veterans who'd seen combat before. Maya killed them methodically, shot 3 800 yards. A fighter trying to use a wadi for concealment. The Barrett's 50 caliber rounds punched through the earthen berm like it was paper. The fighter never knew what hit him. Shot 4, 720 yards. Someone attempting to flank from the east, moving between boulder positions. Maya caught him mid-sprint. The human body couldn't outrun a 50 caliber round traveling 2,800 feet per second. Shot 5, 650 yards. A machine gun team trying to set up a support position. She took out the gunner first, then the assistant gunner when he tried to complete the setup. 2 shots, 2 kills, 42 rounds remaining. Between engagements, Maya worked. Checked Holloway's vitals every 15 minutes. Pulse still steady at 80 beats per minute. blood pressure holding at 95/65. The IV fluids were doing their job. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling incoherently, sometimes quiet. She gave him water when he was lucid enough to swallow, kept him shaded from the climbing sun, monitored for signs of shock or infection. The tourniquet had been in place for 90 minutes. She loosened it slightly, just enough to allow some blood flow and prevent total tissue death, then tightened it again after 30 seconds. A calculated risk but necessary if there was any hope of saving the leg. She also treated herself. The shoulder wound was worse than she'd initially assessed. The shrapnel had gone deeper than 2 inches more, like 3, maybe 4. She could feel it grinding against bone when she moved. Infection was inevitable in this environment, but she couldn't do anything about that now. She redressed the wound with better supplies from her medical ruck, injected herself with antibiotics from her limited supply, and tried not to think about how much it hurt. The pain was constant now. A dull roar that spiked to sharp agony every time the Barrett's recoil slammed into her damaged shoulder. She'd fired 5 times, and each shot felt like being stabbed. She had 42 rounds to go. The mathematics were brutal but simple. If she made every shot count, if she maintained this defensive position, if help arrived before she ran out of ammunition or collapsed from blood loss or infection, they might survive. Too many ifs. 1100 hours. Wave 2. They came again at 1100, more organized this time, 12 fighters advancing in a coordinated assault from multiple directions. They'd learned from the morning's Westerns, stayed at longer ranges, used better cover, moved with tactical discipline that made them harder targets. Maya watched them through the scope, 800 to 900 yards, at the outer edge of what most people would consider effective range. But the Barrett wasn't limited by most people's expectations. At 50 caliber with the right shooter, the M82A, one was effective out to 1,800 meters. At 900 yards, Maya was well within her capability envelope. The problem wasn't the rifle's limitations. It was hers. Every shot hurt now. Her shoulder was swelling, the tissue damage from repeated recoil accumulating. Her hands were trembling, slightly, not from fear, but from pain and blood loss and dehydration. The fever had started too, a low-grade heat that made her head feel muzzy, made concentrating harder. But she'd been shooting since she was 10 years old. Her father had made her practice in all conditions, tired, hungry, cold, hot, stressed. Anyone can shoot fresh, he'd said. You need to shoot when everything hurts and you want to quit. That's when marksmanship matters. Maya found her first target, a fighter setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun on a rock outcropping. 920 yards, long shot, especially in her condition. She did the calculations automatically. At this range, the bullet would drop approximately 35 feet and drift maybe 4 feet in the wind. She adjusted her scope accordingly, compensated for the distance and wind and angle. Found her breathing rhythm despite the pain. Slow, controlled. Between heartbeats, squeezed. The Barrett bucked against her shoulder, agony, but she kept her eye in the scope, forced herself to verify despite the pain. 1.2 seconds later, 920 yards away, the fighter collapsed. The heavy machine gun tumbled from its position, useless now. The other Taliban scattered, but they didn't run. They'd committed to this assault, and they were professionals enough to see it through. Bad decision for them. Over the next 30 minutes, Maya systematically eliminated targets. 900 yards. A fighter's torso visible above a boulder. 1,000 yards. Someone moving between positions, thinking distance meant safety. 850 yards. A flanking element trying to use the eastern approach. 1,100 yards. The longest shot she had attempted since her father was alive, since Colorado, mornings spent on the range with wind and distance, and her father's patient instruction. The Barrett spoke 6 more times. 6 men fell. By 11:30, the valley was quiet again, except for the wind and the distant sound of Cooper's element, still engaged somewhere to the south. Maya lifted her eye from the scope, blinking to clear the tunnel vision that came from extended time behind glass. Her hands were shaking badly now. Blood loss and pain and exhaustion combining to make even simple movements difficult. She checked her ammunition. 36 rounds remaining. Checked Holloway. The tourniquet had been in place for 5 hours. His leg was probably gone, but he was breathing, and breathing meant alive, and alive meant she was doing her job. She keyed her radio with trembling fingers. Cooper's status. Static, then Cooper's voice tight with stress. Still engaged. QRF hit another ambush. 5 clicks out, they're delayed. Best estimate, 60 mics before they can reach us. 60 minutes. 1 more hour. Maya did the math automatically. 60 minutes with 36 rounds against an enemy that kept coming. The math worked. Barely. Roger, she said. I can hold. Brennan, Cooper paused. How many have you engaged? Maya looked at the brass casings scattered around her position. 12 expended rounds from the 48 she'd started with. 12 confirmed kills, sir. Silence on the other end. Long enough that Maya thought she'd lost the connection. Then, with what weapon? Barrett M8 2A1, sir, 50 caliber, ranges from 650 to 1100 yards. Another long pause. Where the hell did you learn to shoot a Barrett, Brennan? Maya looked at her hands, looked at the rifle her father had trained her on, looked at the valley scattered with men who'd underestimated what a corpsman could do. My father taught me, sir, Master Sergeant John Brennan, scout sniper. He made sure I understood that marksmanship wasn't just pulling a trigger. It was mathematics and discipline and the will to make hard shots when everything hurt. She could hear Cooper processing that, trying to reconcile the quiet corpsman he knew with someone who could engage targets at these distances. Can you hold your position? Yes, sir, as long as the ammunition lasts. Roger, hold what you've got. Help is coming. But Maya could hear the doubt in his voice. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? Would she have ammunition left when they got here? Would she still be conscious? Too many questions with no good answers. She settled back behind the Barrett and waited for the next wave. 1,300 to 1,800 hours. Attrition. The afternoon was a slow grind of heat and violence and mathematics. They stopped coming in waves. The Taliban had learned that lesson. Instead, they probed continuously, 1 or 2 men at a time, testing her response time, trying to wear her down, trying to make her expend ammunition on targets that weren't critical. Maya refused to play that game. She let the probes come, only engaging when they got close enough to threaten her position or when they presented targets too valuable to pass up. 1,300 hours, 2 fighters attempting to use a wadi for approach. She waited until they were committed, then engaged. 2 shots, 2 hits. The wadi became their grave. 34 rounds remaining. 1,500 hours, a sniper setting up on a distant ridge 1,400 yards out. She saw the sun glint off his scope, recognized the threat immediately. Put a round through his position before he could take his first shot. Long distance. Difficult shot, but necessary. 33 rounds remaining. 1,700 hours. 3 men in a coordinated rush trying to use speed and surprise. Maya dropped 2 before they'd covered 50 yards. The third made it to cover, but it was cover that left him pinned, unable to advance or retreat. She left him there, better to have him stuck than waste ammunition finishing him. 31 rounds remaining. Between engagements, she fought her body's betrayal. The fever was worse now. She could feel it burning through her blood, making her head fuzzy, making concentration harder. The shoulder wound was definitely infected. She could see the red streaks radiating from the injury, could smell the distinctive odor of bacterial growth. Her hands trembled continuously now, and she had to fight to keep them steady enough for precision shooting. She drunk all her water by 1,400 hours. The dehydration was getting critical, dry mouth difficulty, concentrating urine, dark amber when she'd relieved herself behind a rock. In this heat, dehydration could kill as surely as bullets. She also maintained Holloway. Changed his IV bags, monitored his breathing and pulse. The tourniquet had been in place for 10 hours now. The leg was definitely gone tissue. Death was irreversible after 6 hours of total occlusion. But he was alive, and that's what mattered. He regained consciousness briefly at 1,600 hours. Doc, his voice was weak, confused. What happened? You got hit, Marine, Maya said, not taking her eye from the scope. Femoral artery. I had a tourniquet high. You're going to lose the leg. Oh, a long pause. Then, how long you been fighting? At about 10 hours. Alone. Not alone, you're here. Holloway tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. I'm not much help, Doc. You're staying alive. That's helpful enough. Another pause. Then, that a Barrett you're shooting. Yes. Where'd a corpsman learn to shoot a Barrett? Maya squeezed the trigger, watched a target drop at 900 yards, worked the bolt to chamber a fresh round. My father taught me, she said, before he died, before I promised my mother I'd never touch a rifle again. She paused. Before I had to choose between keeping a promise and keeping you alive. Holloway was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, Doc, for making you break that promise. Don't be. I'd make the same choice again. He drifted back into unconsciousness after that, probably for the best. Consciousness meant feeling pain, and he had enough pain without being awake for it. Maya focused on the scope, on the valley, on staying alive long enough for rescue. 1,800 hours. Sunset. The sun set at 1,900 hours, and with it came a brief tactical reprieve. The Taliban pulled back as darkness approached, probably regrouping, probably planning a night assault. They had to know that Maya's ammunition was running low, had to know that continuous pressure would eventually break her. They weren't wrong. She did a careful inventory as the light faded. Ammunition 28 rounds remaining. She'd fired 20 in the last 12 hours. Not wasteful, but not conservative either. Every shot had been necessary, every target justified. But 28 rounds wouldn't last forever. Water gone, all consumed. She was severely dehydrated now. Headache pounding, vision occasionally blurry, coordination degraded. Probably down to 90% functionality, maybe 85. Medical supplies sufficient to maintain Holloway indefinitely, but her own antibiotics were exhausted. The shoulder infection was spreading. The fever was over 103 now. Without treatment, sepsis would kill her in 24 to 48 hours. Physical condition degraded. The shoulder was useless for anything except absorbing recoil. Her hands shook continuously. The fever made thinking harder, made calculating wind and distance require conscious effort instead of automatic assessment. The mathematics were simple. She was dying, slowly professionally maintaining function as long as possible, but dying nonetheless. The question was whether help would arrive before her body quit. She keyed her radio as darkness settled over the valley. Cooper status. QRF finally broke through their ambush. They're 30 mics out. Brennan, can you hold 30 minutes? 1,800 seconds. An eternity when you were fighting fever and dehydration and 14 confirmed kills worth of enemies who wanted revenge. I'll hold, sir, Maya said, because what else could she say? We're coming for you, Cooper said. Both of you, just hold on. The radio went silent. Maya settled back into position and waited for darkness to bring the next attempt. 2,100 hours. Night assault. They came at 2,100 hours using darkness and night vision as force multipliers. 8 fighters advancing in a tactical line moving with professional discipline. These weren't local Taliban. These were foreign fighters, probably Chechen or Pakistani veterans who'd been doing this for years. Dangerous. Maya watched them through her borrowed night vision device, the world rendered in shades of green and black. They moved well using terrain and darkness together, advancing in bounds with proper cover and mutual support. Professional. She let them close to 350 yards. At that range, even with night vision, they wouldn't see her muzzle flash in time to react effectively. Then she opened fire. The first round caught the lead fighter center mass. The .50 caliber didn't just kill. At this range, it destroyed. The others scattered immediately, their tactical discipline shattering when faced with invisible death. Maya worked the bolt, found another target, fired. The second man dropped. She fired 4 more times in 90 seconds, the Barrett's muzzle flash painting the cave entrance in strobing light. 4 shots, 3 hits. 1 missed because the target dove behind cover at exactly the right moment. The remaining 4 fighters broke and ran, their assault shattered by precision fire they couldn't counter. Maya's shoulder was screaming now. Each recoil felt like her arm was being torn off. She could feel bone grinding on bone, could feel blood running freely down her arm, despite the dressing. 22 rounds remaining. She slumped against the cave wall, breathing hard, fighting against the pain and exhaustion that wanted to drag her under. Couldn't pass out. Not yet. Not while Holloway needed her. Not while the enemy was still out there. Behind her, Holloway was unconscious again. The tourniquet had been in place for 14 hours. His pulse was still steady. Remarkably, his cardiovascular system had compensated for the blood loss, the IV fluids, maintaining sufficient pressure. He'd survive this. If they were rescued soon, if infection didn't set in, if a dozen other variables aligned correctly, he'd survive. Minus 1 leg, but alive. That had to be enough. Maya checked the time. 2,200 hours. QRF was supposedly 20 minutes out when Cooper had called. That had been 30 minutes ago. Which meant she heard them before she saw them. The distinctive thump, thump, thump of Black Hawk rotors still distant but getting closer. Rescue. She keyed her radio with hands that could barely hold the device. Cooper, I hear helicopters. That's QRF Brennan. They're inbound to your position. Pop smoke when you see them. Maya pulled her last smoke grenade from her vest. Purple smoke, medical emergency priority casualty. Pulled the pin, threw it as hard as she could manage, which wasn't very hard given her condition. Purple smoke billowed into the night sky, visible even in darkness. The helicopters altered course, heading directly for her position. 2 minutes, maybe 3, then this would be over. Maya settled back behind the Barrett one final time, providing overwatch while the birds came in. If the Taliban tried one more assault during the landing, she'd stop them. 22 rounds, more than enough for one final engagement. The Blackhawks flared over her position, rotors kicking up dust and debris. She could see the ropes dropping, the QRF team fast roping down with tactical precision. 12 Marines in full combat gear, weapons ready, fanning out to secure the landing zone. And leading them moving fast toward Maya's position was Senior Chief Marcus Reeves. The SEAL medic covered the ground at a sprint, his team spreading out to establish a defensive perimeter. He stopped at the cave entrance, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Holloway unconscious. IVI lines still running, tourniquets still in place after 14 hours. Maya slumped against the wall, shoulders soaked with blood, hands shaking, eyes glassy with fever. The Barrett M8 2A1 still on its bipod, still aimed at the valley. And beyond, scattered across the terrain in neat intervals, the bodies. 14 of them. Reeves lowered his rifle slowly. "Corpsman Brennan," he said carefully. "What happened here?" Maya tried to answer, but her mouth was too dry. Tried to reach for water before remembering she'd drunk it all hours ago. Reeves was beside her, instantly professional medical training taking over. He pulled his own water, held it to her lips. Easy, small sips. The water tasted like salvation. Maya drank, coughed, drank again. "Holloway first," she managed, her voice rough as sandpaper. "Tourniquet's been on 14 hours. Needs surgical intervention immediately or he definitely loses the leg." Reeves glanced at Holloway, then back at Maya. "I've got a surgical team on the bird. They'll take him. But right now I need to assess you. Where are you hit?" "Shrapnel, left shoulder, approximately 4 inches deep. Infection present, fever 103.5 last time I checked." Maya's clinical assessment came automatically even through the exhaustion. "Blood loss moderate, dehydration severe. Combat effective time, maybe 30 more minutes before I lose consciousness." Reeves keyed his radio. "I need a litter team and surgical evac now. 2 casualties, 1 critical, 1 urgent." Then he turned his attention to the valley beyond the cave, to the bodies scattered at impossible distances, to the empty brass casings, to the Barrett. "Brennan," he said quietly, "those men out there, that was you." Maya nodded. "All of them. 14 confirmed kills, ranges from 350 to 1,400 yards. Her voice was flat, emotionless, delivering facts. "I had to protect the casualty." Reeves stared at her for a long moment, processing what it took to make those shots, to hold this position alone for 14 hours, to maintain medical care while conducting precision fire at extreme range. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" The question Maya had known was coming. The question that meant 8 years of hiding were over. The secret revealed the promise to her mother, publicly broken. "My father," she said. "Master Sergeant John Brennan, Marine Scout Sniper. 96 confirmed kills in Iraq. Killed in action November 2004 during the Second Battle of Fallujah." She paused. "He taught me everything from age 10 to 16. I promised my mother after he died that I'd never use those skills. Kept that promise for 8 years. Until today," Reeves said. "Until I had to choose between the promise and Holloway's life." 2 corpsmen arrived with a litter, moving with practiced efficiency to prepare Holloway for transport. They looked at the tourniquet at the time marked on the strap, at the IV line still flowing. One of them, a young hospital corpsman, 3rd class, looked at Maya with something approaching awe. 14 hours on a tourniquet, and he's still got pulses in the foot. That's incredible work, corpsman." "Will he keep the leg?" Maya asked. "Maybe. Probably not, but maybe. You gave him a chance. That's more than most would have in this situation." They loaded Holloway onto the litter and carried him toward the waiting helicopter. Maya tried to stand to follow, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The adrenaline that had kept her functional for 14 hours was crashing hard, leaving only exhaustion and pain. Reeves caught her before she fell. "Easy, Brennan, I've got you." "The Barrett," Maya said, her mind still stuck on details, on making sure nothing was forgotten. I'll bring it. You need to get on that bird." 14 Taliban KYA, she insisted. "Verified through scope. Engagement ranges 350 to 1,400. Ammunition expended, 26 rounds, 50 caliber BMG. 26. She'd started with 48, which meant, "How many rounds do you have left?" Reeves asked. Maya's hands moved to check the magazine automatically. 22. But that wasn't right. The title had said 11. She'd ended with 11 bullets. Then she understood. The final wave. The dawn assault that hadn't happened yet in this timeline. That was still coming. "Sir," Maya said, fighting to stay conscious, "they'll come again at dawn. Final push. I calculated I'd need 11 rounds to stop them." Reeves looked at her fever-bright eyes, at her determination, even as her body shut down. "You won't need to stop them," he said gently. "We're here now. The fight's over. Maya wanted to believe that, wanted to let go to stop being responsible to just be rescued. But she'd been fighting for 14 hours. Letting go didn't come easily. Reeves half carried, half dragged her to the helicopter. The crew chief helped her aboard, got her strapped into a seat. The medics started working immediately, checking vitals, establishing IV access, beginning fluid resuscitation. Through the open door, Maya could see the valley where she'd fought, could see the bodies scattered like markers of a very bad day, could see the cave where she'd broken an 8-year-old promise to save one Marine's life. The Black Hawk lifted off, rotors biting air, climbing fast, banking away from the killing ground. As they climbed in, Maya heard Reeves's voice over the radio talking to the pilot, and there was something in his tone she'd never heard before. One corpsman, 14 hours, 14 confirmed kills with a Barrett M8-2A1, ranges out to 1,400 yards. A pause. Most of them won't believe it, but I saw the evidence. It's real. The morphine from the IV was taking effect now, warm and soft, pulling her down into darkness. Maya let it take her, let go of the hypervigilance that had kept her alive, let someone else be responsible. Her last conscious thought was of her father, of promises made and promises broken, of steady hands and impossible shots and the weight of skills she'd tried to bury. I'm sorry, Dad, she thought, but I think you'd understand. Then darkness took her, and for the first time in 14 hours, Maya Brennan stopped fighting. Maya woke to white walls and fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic that meant she was far from Afghanistan. Her first coherent thought was Holloway. Her second thought was, my shoulder hurts. The third thought was interrupted by a voice beside her bed. Easy there, shooter. You're in Germany, Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. You've been out for 36 hours. Maya turned her head slowly because moving fast made the room spin and found Senior Chief Marcus Reeves sitting in a chair beside her hospital bed, still in his combat uniform, still carrying the dust of Afghanistan. He must have come straight from the field. Holloway. Maya's voice came out as a croak throat, raw from intubation and dehydration. Stable. They saved the leg. Reeves leaned forward, barely. Another hour on that tourniquet, and it would have been gone, but you kept it tight enough to prevent total tissue death. The surgeons said it was perfect technique. They're going to use your case as a teaching example. Maya processed that through the morphine haze. Saved the leg. That was good. Better than good. You had a pretty serious infection going, Reeves continued. Fever hit 104 before they got it under control. The shrapnel was deeper than you thought, 4.5 inches embedded in your scapula. They had to do surgery to extract it. Maya's left arm was in a sling, she realized. Couldn't feel much through the painkillers, but she could see the bandages, could see the drainage tube. How long until I'm cleared for duty? Reeves gave her a look that said he'd expected that question. 6 weeks minimum, probably 8. You fractured your scapula from repeated Barrett recoil. The bone needs time to heal. 8 weeks, 2 months sitting in medical hold while her team was still deployed. There's something else, Reeves said, his tone shifting to something more serious. There's going to be an inquiry, not disciplinary standard procedure for any engagement with that many enemy KIA. But Commander Victoria Ashford from Intelligence wants to talk to you about your background, about your father, about how a hospital corpsman's second class managed to hold off 30 Taliban fighters with a rifle she wasn't even issued. 30 fighters. The number had grown in the retelling, apparently. 14 confirmed, Maya corrected automatically. Not 30. 14 that you killed. Intelligence estimates you were facing 28 to 32 total fighters over the course of the engagement. Some withdrew, some reinforced. You didn't kill all of them, but you stopped all of them. Maya was quiet processing that. Brennan, Reeves said carefully, the team wants to see you, Cooper, Sullivan, the others. They've been waiting for you to wake up. Sullivan, the skeptical SEAL who'd called the mission babysitting, who'd questioned why they were bringing a corpsman. I bet they have questions, Maya said. Yeah, Reeves agreed, but not the questions you think. Before Maya could ask what he meant, the door opened. Lieutenant Wade Cooper entered, followed by Petty Officer Garrett Sullivan and 2 other SEALs from the patrol. They all looked like they'd had about as much sleep as Maya, which was to say not enough. Cooper stopped at the foot of her bed. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Sullivan stepped forward. Corpsman Brennan, he said formally, then paused, started again. Maya, I owe you an apology. Maya blinked. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't this. I called the mission babysitting, Sullivan continued. Called you dead weight. I was wrong. You saved Holloway's life with your medical skills. Then you held that position for 14 hours with marksmanship that most designated snipers couldn't match. You proved, he paused, choosing words carefully. You proved that assumptions are dangerous, that underestimating people will get you killed, and you proved that I was an idiot for not recognizing your capabilities. You didn't know, Maya said quietly. I didn't tell anyone. That was deliberate. Why? Cooper asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Those skills, you could have been a designated marksman, could have applied for sniper school. Instead, you became a corpsman. Maya looked at her hands, steady hands, surgeon hands, her father's hands. When my father died in Fallujah in 2004, it broke my mother, she said quietly. He was her whole world and the Marine Corps took him from her. At his funeral, she made me promise that I'd never follow that path, that I'd save lives instead of taking them. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I meant that promise, wanted to honor it. So I joined the Navy as a corpsman, focused entirely on medicine, thought I could be useful, could serve without being what my father was. But you couldn't escape the training, Reeves said softly. No, the skills were too deep. Muscle memory doesn't forget. Every time I moved tactically, every time I read terrain, every time I saw a rifle, the knowledge was there. I just chose not to use it. Until Holloway needed you to, Cooper said. Until I had to choose between keeping a promise and keeping someone alive. Maya met their eyes, each one in turn. I chose life. I'd do it again. Sullivan nodded slowly. Your mother, does she know? Not yet, but she will. Cooper pulled up a chair, sat down. The informal gesture turned this from a military briefing into something more personal. Commander Ashford is coming tomorrow, he said, and she's investigating your background, your training, your capabilities. This is going to become official. Brennan, no more hiding what you can do. I understand, sir. The question is, what happens next? Do you go back to being strictly a corpsman, or do you acknowledge both skill sets? Maya hadn't had time to think about that. Hadn't had time to consider what came after the revelation after 8 years of hiding were stripped away in 14 hours of combat. I don't know, sir, she said honestly. Well, Cooper said, you've got 6 weeks of medical recovery to figure it out. In the meantime, rest, heal, and know that from my team you have our respect. Medical skills, tactical skills, all of it. You're not just a corpsman anymore. What am I then, sir? Cooper smiled slightly. We're still figuring that out. Commander Victoria Ashford arrived 72 hours later. Maya was mobile by then, still in the sling, still on pain medication, but able to walk and think clearly. They met in a private conference room at the hospital, away from the bustle of the wards. Ashford was 42 Navy intelligence with sharp eyes that said she'd spent a career finding truths people tried to hide. She set up a laptop on the conference table and gestured for Maya to sit. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Brennan, Ashford said formally. Thank you for meeting with me. I'm here to discuss the engagement in Helmand Province and the capabilities you demonstrated during that action. Yes, ma'am. Ashford pulled up a file on her laptop, turned it so Maya could see. Master Sergeant John Brennan, United States Marine Corps, Scout Sniper. 3 deployments to Iraq, 96 confirmed kills, Navy Cross 2 Silver Stars, Purple Heart. Killed in action, November 13, 2004, during the Second Battle of Fallujah. Maya's throat tightened, seeing her father's service record laid out like that, clinical, statistical, reducing a man's life to numbers and medals. Your father was a legend, Ashford continued. Some of the Marines I spoke to still talk about the shots he made, the missions he completed. He was one of the best the Corps ever produced. He was, Maya said quietly. Ashford pulled up another file. Training logs from a private shooting range in Colorado. Detailed records spanning 6 years. 2000 through 2006. Instructor John Brennan. Student Maya Brennan, age 10 through 16. 6 years of intensive training in precision marksmanship. She scrolled through the logs, and Maya saw her own history reflected back. Every weekend, every session, every lesson her father had taught about wind and distance and the mathematics of long-range shooting. Your father didn't just teach you to shoot, Ashford said. He trained you like he was preparing you for combat. Range estimation, wind reading, bullet drop compensation, moving targets, cold bore shots, stress shooting, everything a professional sniper learns he taught you. Maya nodded. He wanted me to understand, not just how to pull a trigger, but why. The physics, the environmental factors, the mental discipline, all of it. And you absorbed it. I did. Ashford closed that file, opened another. This one showed a single date in October 2006. The training logs end here. October 2006, 2 years after your father's death. Why? Maya took a breath. That's when I made the promise to my mother, when I decided to stop using those skills, when I joined the Navy to become a corpsman instead of anything else. You kept that promise for 8 years, until Lance Corporal Holloway needed me to break it. Ashford was quiet for a moment, studying Maya with those sharp intelligence officer eyes. I spoke with your mother 3 days ago, she said finally. Maya's head snapped up. You did? I needed to verify your story, understand the context. Ashford pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, then set it on the table. She gave permission for me to share this with you. She pressed play. Maya's mother's voice filled the room, familiar and achingly close despite the distance. Commander, my daughter made me a promise the day we buried her father. She swore she'd never follow the path that took him from me, that she'd save lives instead of taking them. And she kept that promise. For 8 years she kept it. A pause, the sound of someone taking a shaky breath. But her father made me a promise too, years before he died. He promised he'd always protect people who couldn't protect themselves, that he'd stand between evil and innocent people no matter the cost. Another pause. Maya kept both promises. She stayed away from violence until someone innocent needed protecting. Then she became exactly what her father trained her to be. The voice broke slightly. I'm so proud of her. John would be proud of her. She found a way to honor both of us. The recording ended. Maya sat very still, feeling tears prick at her eyes for the first time since the firefight. Her mother understood. Understood the choice, the necessity, the impossible balance between promises made and lives saved. Your mother gave permission for your skills to be officially recognized, Ashford said gently. She said, and I quote, if my daughter can save lives with both hands, then let her. Both hands, the phrase resonated. Medical skills in one hand, combat skills in the other. Not choosing one over the other, using both. What happens now, Maya asked. Ashford pulled out another document. Official Navy letterhead. That depends on you. The Navy is prepared to offer several options. One, return to regular corpsman duties. No change to your military occupational specialty. 2, redesignate as a Special Operations Combat Medic with advanced tactical training. 3, create a new designation that doesn't currently exist, an Integrated Combat Medic who can provide both advanced trauma care and precision fire support. Maya looked at the options, feeling the weight of the decision. There's also a 4th option, Ashford continued. You could apply for SEAL training. With your skills, you'd likely be accepted. No, Maya said immediately. Ashford raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because that would mean choosing combat over medicine. I'm a corpsman first. I save lives first. The shooting, that's only when I have to, when there's no other choice. Both hands, Ashford said softly. Both hands, Maya agreed. Then I'd recommend option 3. Help us create something new. A designation that recognizes both skill sets. A role that lets you heal when you can and fight when you must. Maya thought about Holloway, about the 14 hours she'd spent alternating between medical care and combat, about the way those skills had complemented each other, enhanced each other. I'd like that, ma'am, she said, on one condition, which is I want to teach. If this becomes a real program, I want to train others. Show them how to integrate these skills, how to be complete instead of specialized. Ashford smiled. I think that can be arranged, Corpsman Brennan. 6 weeks later, Maya was cleared for light duty. The shoulder had healed enough for basic movement, though she'd never have full range of motion again. The scar tissue from the shrapnel and the fracture from Barrett recoil had left permanent damage. But she could function, could do her job. She reported to Camp Bastion, Afghanistan, expecting to return to the medical tent. Instead, Lieutenant Cooper was waiting with a rifle, not an M4. A Mark 12 special purpose rifle, the precision weapon used by SEAL-designated marksmen, and beside it her medical ruck. New mission, Cooper said without preamble. Downed pilot 20 clicks north. Taliban knows his position and they're moving to capture. We've got maybe 6 hours. Maya looked at the gear. Medical equipment and tactical weapon. Both. What's my role, sir? Whatever's needed, Brennan, you're both now. Medic and marksman. Use whichever skill the mission requires. Sullivan appeared beside her carrying a scope. The skeptical SEAL who'd become one of her strongest advocates. Leopold Mark IV, he said, handing it to her, belonged to my father. He used it in Desert Storm. Figured it's appropriate. Maya took the scope, felt the weight of acceptance in the gesture. Thank you, she said. Thank me by bringing that pilot home alive, Sullivan said. Both hands right. Both hands, Maya confirmed. The mission launched at 2200 hours. 8 operators moving fast through Afghan darkness toward a grid coordinate where a Navy pilot sat with a broken leg, waiting for either rescue or capture. The Taliban was moving too racing against time to secure a valuable prisoner. Maya kept pace with the SEAL team, the Mark 12 across her back, medical ruck properly distributed. She was carrying more weight than during the previous mission, but 6 weeks of physical therapy had rebuilt her strength, rebalanced her conditioning. They reached the pilot's position at 0100 hours. He was in bad shape. Compound fracture of the left tibia bone visible through torn flesh. 8 hours of exposure to the Afghan cold. Early shock setting in from pain and temperature loss. "I've got him," Maya said, dropping her rifle and moving to the casualty. The SEAL team set up a security perimeter while Maya worked, splinting the leg with materials from her ruck, starting an IV, wrapping the pilot in thermal blankets. All the medical procedures she'd done 1,000 times before, but this time she could hear movement in the darkness. Multiple contacts closing on their position. Cooper keyed the radio. "We've got 30-plus Taliban inbound, 3 minutes out." Maya looked at the pilot, looked at her work. He needed another 4 minutes of stabilization before he could be moved safely. "Can you give me 4 minutes?" she asked. Cooper evaluated the tactical situation. "We'll give you what we can. Get it done." Maya worked faster, secured the splint with quick wraps instead of perfect ones, got the IV flowing at maximum rate, got the pilot's core temperature stabilized enough that movement wouldn't kill him. 3 minutes. Then she heard Sullivan's voice. "Contact 900 yards north, multiple targets." Maya finished taping the IV line, stood, grabbed her Mark 12. "He's stable for transport," she told Reeves. "Get him to the extract point." "What are you doing?" Reeves asked. "Buying you time." She moved to a position with good sightlines, set up the Mark 12 on its bipod, looked through the Leopold scope her father would have recognized, would have approved of. 900 yards out, she could see them. Taliban fighters moving in tactical formation toward the pilot's last known position. 10 men, weapons ready, closing fast. Maya settled into the familiar rhythm her father had taught her, breathing, heart rate, wind reading. Fired. The lead target dropped. The others scattered. She shifted aim. Fired again. Another target down. Behind her, she could hear Reeves and the others moving the pilot. They needed 2 more minutes to get him clear. Maya gave them 3. 6 shots, 5 hits, 1 miss when the target moved at exactly the wrong moment. But 5 Taliban fighters neutralized at 900 yards, buying critical time. Then she was up and moving, rifle in hand, rejoining the team as they carried the pilot toward extraction. They made it 400 meters before contact again. Closer this time, 200 yards. No time for precision shooting. The team engaged with suppressive fire while Maya dropped back to the pilot. His blood pressure was dropping. The stress of movement was pushing him toward shock. "I need 30 seconds, she called. The team gave her 20. She adjusted IV flow, administered pain medication, stabilized vitals. Then she was up with her rifle, providing covering fire while they moved. Medic to marksman, healing to fighting, both hands working together, not separately. They reached the extract point at 0300. The pilot was alive, stable, ready for medevac. As the Black Hawk climbed into darkness, Cooper turned to Maya. "That's how it's done," he said. "You just proved integration beats specialization." Maya looked at her hands. One had held medical instruments. One had held a rifle. Both had saved a life. "Both hands," she said. "Both hands," Cooper agreed. 6 months later, Camp Pendleton, California, January 2013. The classroom held 24 students, Navy corpsmen and Marine infantry volunteers, all selected for a program that was still being defined, still being built from the ground up. The program that existed because Maya Brennan had spent 14 hours in an Afghan cave, proving it was possible to be both medic and warrior. Chief Petty Officer Maya Brennan stood at the front of the classroom in her dress uniform, the chief's anchors on her collar still new enough to gleam. They'd promoted her, recognized her skills, given her a new role that didn't exist in any manual because she was writing the manual. "Welcome to Integrated Combat Medicine," Maya said to her first class. "This program exists because of one fundamental truth: dead medics can't heal anyone. Your primary mission is medical care, never forget that. But you're also operating in environments where medical personnel become priority targets, where the enemy will kill you specifically because you can save the lives they want ended." She moved to the whiteboard, wrote 2 phrases in firm letters. "Heal when you can, fight when you must." "You'll learn both skills in this program," Maya continued. "Medical procedures under stress, tactical marksmanship, how to transition from treating casualties to engaging threats. But most importantly, you'll learn wisdom, knowing which moment requires which response." A hand went up. young Corman, maybe 22, with the eager expression of someone who'd volunteered for this without fully understanding what they were signing up for. Chief, is it true you held off 30 Taliban for 18 hours? 14 confirmed kills, Maya corrected automatically. Not 30. And it wasn't 18 hours, it was 14 hours from initial contact to extraction. And I wasn't holding them off for glory. I was protecting a wounded Marine who couldn't protect himself. That's the mission. That's always the mission. She let that sink in. Another hand, different student. What's the hardest part? The medical work or the combat? Maya thought about that question, about Holloway and the tourniquet and the 14 hours of fighting, about the promise she'd made and the promise she'd broken, about her father's training and her mother's forgiveness. The hardest part, she said carefully, is knowing when to use which skill, knowing that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop bleeding, and sometimes the most important thing is stop the threat. Wisdom comes from understanding which moment requires which response. She moved to her desk, picked up a framed photo she kept there. Her father in Marine dress blues. Master Sergeant John Brennan looking exactly like he did in her memories. My father taught me to shoot, she said. He taught me that marksmanship is discipline and mathematics and the will to make impossible shots when everything hurts. My mother taught me to heal. She taught me that every life matters, that saving one person is saving the world. Maya set the photo down gently. In Afghanistan, I learned that my father and my mother were both right, that I could honor both of them, that the hands my mother taught to heal could be the same hands my father taught to fight. She held up her hands so the class could see them. Both hands, one mission, saving lives. The phrase had spread since that day in Afghanistan. Both hands. It was becoming a motto, a philosophy, a way of thinking about combat medicine that hadn't existed before Maya proved it was possible. After class, Maya walked across Camp Pendleton to the administration building where Commander Ashford kept an office. The intelligence officer looked up from her computer as Maya entered. Chief Brennan, Ashford said with a smile. Good timing. I wanted to show you something. She pulled up a map on her screen, locations marked across the United States and overseas. Your program has been approved for full expansion, Ashford said. 3 SEAL teams adopting the integrated combat medic model, 2 Marine Raider battalions. Army Special Forces is developing their own version based on your curriculum. The VA wants to use it for civilian paramedic training. Maya studied the map, saw the reach of what had started in a cave in Afghanistan. How many students total, she asked. 340 trained so far. With the expansion, we're projecting over 1,000 in the next 2 years. Ashford pulled up another file. And the statistics are remarkable. Units with integrated combat medics have 43% higher survival rates for casualties. 43%, Brennan. That's your legacy. Maya felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, the memories of that day would never be peaceful, but purpose, meaning. There's one more thing, Ashford said quietly. She pulled up a different file. We've been tracking outcomes for your graduates. So far, we have documented 127 confirmed lives saved by corpsmen who completed your program. 127 people who are alive because you taught their medics to do what you did. 127 lives. Maya thought about Holloway, who'd made a full recovery and returned to active duty. About the Navy pilot they'd rescued 6 months ago who'd walked again after extensive surgery. About all the people she'd never meet who were alive because someone trained in her program had made the right choice at the right moment. Both hands, one mission. Thank you, ma'am, Maya said. That weekend, Maya made a drive she made once a month when she wasn't deployed. From Camp Pendleton to Arlington National Cemetery. 5 hours through California and across state lines to the neat rows of white headstones that held the nation's honored dead. She found the marker easily. She'd walked this path enough times to know it by heart. Master Sergeant John Brennan, United States Marine Corps, 1968 to 2004. Navy Cross. Maya sat on the grass beside her father's headstone. She'd brought something with her today. Something she'd been holding on to, waiting for the right moment to let go. The Leopold scope from the Mark 12. The one Sullivan had given her, the one that had belonged to his father, the one she'd used to prove that integration beat specialization. She set it carefully at the base of the headstone. I kept it, Dad, she said quietly. Thought you'd want to know I used it right. Used everything you taught me right. Not for glory or medals or any of that, just to save people. A breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling the flags on nearby graves. Mom understands now. Took her a while, but she gets it. We talk every week. She's proud. Says you'd be proud too. Maya paused, gathering her thoughts. I'm teaching now. 340 students so far. Teaching them to do what you taught me. Not just the shooting, and anyone can teach shooting. I'm teaching them to be complete, to heal and fight, to know when each skill matters. She stood, brushed grass from her uniform. They call it both hands. The idea that you can heal and protect, that you don't have to choose one over the other, that you can honor both the mother who taught you to save lives and the father who taught you to defend them. Maya touched the headstone, felt the cool marble under her palm. I broke my promise to Mom for 14 hours, but I kept your promise for 8 years and I'm keeping it still. Protecting people who can't protect themselves, standing between evil and innocence, making the hard choices. She stepped back, came to attention, rendered a salute. Semper Fi, Dad, and thank you for teaching me that being complete beats being specialized, that both hands matter. The drive back to Camp Pendleton gave Maya time to think about Monday, about the new class starting, about the curriculum refinements she wanted to make, about the next generation of corpsmen who would carry this forward. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reeves. New mission brief Monday 0800. Might need both hands again. Maya smiled, sent back a simple reply. Ready? Because she was, ready to teach, ready to serve, ready to use both the skills her father had taught and the skills her mother had valued. Ready to be complete instead of specialized. Both hands, one mission, saving lives. That night, Maya stood in her apartment, looking at herself in the mirror. Chief Petty Officer, instructor, combat veteran, daughter of a legend who'd become a legend herself. On her desk sat a framed photo, her father on one side, her mother on the other. And between them, Maya at 16 on a Colorado shooting range, her father's hand on her shoulder, both of them smiling. Before the promises, before the loss, before the impossible choice, but also before the answer. She'd found a way to honor both of them, to be both healer and warrior, to break the promise that limited her and keep the promise that completed her. Both hands could hold a rifle and surgical instruments. Both hands could destroy threats and save lives. Both hands could honor a father who taught strength and a mother who taught compassion. Both hands could change the world one life at a time. Maya turned off the light and prepared for Monday. For teaching, for passing forward the lessons she'd learned in blood and pain, in 14 hours of impossible choices. Tomorrow she'd show 24 students what both hands could do. Tomorrow the legacy would continue. Tomorrow more lives would be saved. But tonight Chief Petty Officer Maya Brennan slept the sleep of the justified someone who'd found their purpose and made peace with the cost. Outside, the California night was peaceful. Inside, Maya dreamed of Colorado mountains and Afghan valleys, and all the people still alive because she'd refused to choose between who she was and who she was supposed to be. She'd become both, and that had made all the difference.